Knights at the Round Table, a round table discussion on speculative fiction books and film. Hi everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Knights at the Round Table. Today we are discussing the fantasy novel The Goblin Emperor, and I am sitting at the table with Nathan, and I'd like to start with general impressions of the book. Nathan?
I love this book. I read it in 2016, and it immediately made it to my top 10 of that year. I was just brilliant. I have a lot of things to say, and I'll...
Oh, good. So do I.
Yeah.
I have like 3 things to say. Same for me. I loved this book a lot. Enough that I'm going to add it to my personal collection, which is saying a lot because I don't actually have space for it. But, you know, the floor is a shelf, right?
It is at my house.
I loved it. I loved the story. I loved how the protagonist was portrayed, and I loved the language they used.
Yes.
I am such a sucker for prose that flows beautifully, and this prose really did. It was absolute delight to read.
There was also a real attention to the meaning of language in that book.
Yeah.
The whole process of choosing a name for the new king was given such importance because choosing a name sort of meant declaring everything that you're going to be as a new king.
Yeah.
And you really feel the weight of that choice in the book, and that's something that's not easily conveyed.
No. Yes, and I also like how he came up with the name and why. So the protagonist, Maya, because I can read. The protagonist, Maya, is not what you would consider your typical fantasy hero. He is, yes, of high birth, sort of, was typical fantasy trope sort of shuttered away and didn't expect to become the emperor.
So he's also the result of a political alliance marriage where he's from, there's a goblin kingdom, and then there's the human kingdom.
No, the elvish.
Elvish, sorry.
Yeah, there are no humans in this.
No, exactly. But anyway, so the elvish king marries the goblin princess at some point for like a peace sort of alliance thing. Yeah. A son is born, which is the youngest of, I think, 4 other sons.
Yes,
3 or 4,
something like that.
and he, he's a half goblin, so obviously his skin is dark. His goblin heritage is very visible right away. So, the queen is sent away and dies very rapidly, and then the goblin son is sent to live out his days in a country where no one can see him.
Yeah. Also, the way that it was presented to me, it seems to me that the goblins and the elves are basically the same. It's just that one is dark-skinned, one is light-skinned.
Pretty
so
much,
it's basically like people. But they call them goblins and elves instead of humans. But he's not your typical fantasy hero. There is no swashbuckling. There is no sword swinging. There is no bravado or anything like that. Maya is a young, wildly empathetic, mild-mannered, intelligent young man. And it is really refreshing to have a fantasy book where the hero is the hero, not because he's got the strongest arm, but because he's got the biggest heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. He gains all of his friends in the court because of acts of compassion, not because he is especially charismatic or brave or anything like that.
And he comes from, he was taught by, I think, a cousin or something.
Yeah, it was some relation like that.
Who was also in disgrace, and his punishment was to raise this boy. And so, there's a lot of resentment, and they didn't have a happy family relationship. But
there's a lot of abuse going on.
There's a lot of abuse. But instead of growing up to be, sort of angry and defined by what happened and vengeful, or instead of just like folding and remaining sort of in a victimhood, he arranges things in a way that he's showing kind of gratefulness for this man having raised him, but also like, this man comes to court with him expecting to have, recognition and riches rained upon him, and, he turns around and like, no, you treated me horribly for my whole life, goodbye.
without it being an act of spite.
Without it being bitter.
Yeah.
No, it's just.
Yeah, and it's not sort of, he's not exactly a paragon, because he does wrestle with his own bitterness about this. Like, he wants to do something really shitty. He's like, no, I'm emperor now, I can't do that. Gotta, like, be, not even smart about this. It's, he did some horrible shit to me when I was a kid, but he did raise me, and he did teach me some of the stuff that's coming in handy right now. So, he'll get a position, it won't be in the court, I don't want to see his face. But, you know, and then after that's done, I really, really related to that, like, a lot. There are just some people you're like, you know, your family and I love you, but you were shit. Yeah. Please go away.
and it was a difficult decision, and you know, he did struggle with it a lot, but he recognized also that he's in a precarious situation and he's not going to make any friends by acting like the exact same kind of asshole that everybody else is acting
like. Yeah. And that was the thing too, was this whole, you're in a position of power, so you're not allowed friends thing that he was really struggling against. Yes. And I did love his 2 bodyguards.
Oh my gosh. The relationships there. The very careful, cautious friendship. The lines that have to be drawn because you're in that position. But also, you know, this is a person who's going to be with you 24/7 when you're snoring, when you're having sex, when you're going in the bathroom. Like, you need to get along with this person.
Yeah. As a protagonist, I really loved Maya. He was so sweet. And one of the things that made me go, oh, there were several of those in the book. One of the things was the note that he sends to his half-sister.
Yes.
Study the stars.
Yes.
After he nulls all sort of marriage advances from anyone while she's grieving for a year. And then he's just like, go study the stars, because that's what she wanted to do. She wanted to study astronomy, but she couldn't, because a woman's role in this world is very much porn. Basically, you are a political object. You marry, you have children. That is your entire life.
You have to secure a gainful alliance through marriage. And that's your purpose.
That's your purpose in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think his relationship, his loving relationship with his mother, who died when he was 8, sort of informs all of his actions. So he's really, really kind to the women in the court. And the way the struggle of women without agency, of intelligent, powerful women without agency, was really, really well written in this book.
Because he saw his mother being treated horrifically throughout her entire life, and her telling these stories of being treated like an object and like a thing, and then him having to endure that as well, being, you know, different from his brothers and sisters. That really gave him a unique point of view. Yeah,
and then his actions slowly, strand by strand, start unbinding the constraints of women in society. Slowly, it's not complete, obviously, by the time the book ends, because that's like a process. Don't we know it? But he does slowly start picking away at the constraints, funneling all women, regardless of their abilities or intelligence, into this one role. And it was really beautifully woven all the way throughout the narrative. And I really, really enjoyed it. Like, every time one of those strands were cut, I was like, yay!
And it's extremely subtle.
It's subtle.
This is an author, so Katherine Addison is actually a pen name for Sarah Monette. I don't know if you know her. She wrote Mélusine, and she has a talent for extremely complicated and immersive worlds.
Well,
and this book is no exception to that. But she also has a talent for stories that are almost like, if you look at this story, you know, there's a death at the beginning, obviously, which grants him the throne, and then there's a couple of assassination attempts, but it's not a big epic story of you know...
There are no epic battles, no conquests, nothing of the sort.
It's not like nothing happens in this book. It's just very subtle, and it's all about how rearranging tiny little things and how pushing things in the right direction can change the course of an entire nation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, the workings of the Elvish court was really fascinating.
Yes.
Normally, political discussions in fantasy books bore me to tears. They drive me up the wall. Couldn't care less. But this was so intricately woven in and crucial to the story that you understood who was what and where they stood and why. And it was just beautifully done. And I was hanging on every word. I was absolutely fascinated to find out what was going to happen next.
Absolutely, because it wasn't about the power and it wasn't about the country and the people. It was about the personalities at play.
Yeah.
And how they interacted with each other.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't like the stakes were not so much the kingdom, which a lot of fantasy authors tend to, you know, try to make you understand what's at stake for the people of the kingdom and the war and all that. But what's really at stake here is what's going to happen to these characters if certain things come to pass.
Yeah, and you tend to fall in love with some of the characters.
Yes.
And I really loved Maya.
Me too.
I love him so much.
He was amazing.
He was 18, skinny, and dark is one of the descriptions, and I was like...
Yeah.
I love him. Oh, there was one thing that made me laugh was, this is only for people who have recently or watched footage of God of War, the new PS4 release, because there is a line that his cousin says, "Thou must be Emperor, boy," and then I read boy, and all I could hear was Kratos in my head, boy. There is a supercut of the number of times Kratos says boy in the new PS4. It is 23 minutes long.
Wow.
It's a long video of just boy, 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 come over here, boy. And then I could not get that out of my head when I was reading that. So it's an aside, but I thought I would mention it because it made me giggle. Shouldn't have, but it did. Boy.
But yeah, there's also, you know, you were mentioning the word thou. A lot of fantasy does this where they throw in thee and thou to make it sound literary. But there's actually a way that the language is used here where you use thou in certain circumstances and you use you in certain circumstances, and it becomes so well written and so well played that by the middle of the book you start noticing when people are using the wrong word to send a certain message.
You know the grammatical rules inherently.
Yes.
And I don't think it strays too far from the actual thee, thou, you, your.
No. Not too far, but there's a certain sort of, you know, kind of like the Japanese, you know...
Yeah, formal and informal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way thee and thou in you and your was worked. I think
I don't
in
know.
English way
English
back
isn't
in the
my
day.
first language.
I don't know, I stopped studying the development of English after Old English. No. Anglo-Saxon. That's about where I stopped, and then I stopped caring.
But what I mean is, even if I didn't know these things, because English isn't my second language, isn't my first language, it's so well done in the book that you get a sense of it.
Yeah, it becomes inherently clear without need for explanation. The other person who did that, although it was with slang, is the Provost's Dog series by Tamora Pierce.
Yes.
All the slang in there is never explained, but by like page 5 you've got it. Just because it's so well written and so perfectly put. There were a couple of side stories in this which made me cry. One relating specifically to the protagonist and his mother's death. The way his grief was written was, I keep using the word beautiful, but it was beautiful and very true to life. Like how grief sometimes hits you at the weirdest moments. Like you could be pouring a cup of tea and then suddenly that cup of tea reminds you of your grandmother and you're in tears, even though it's been 10 years since she passed away. So, yeah.
This was very artfully done.
Yeah. And I also cried at Kelleher's story. So for those of you who don't know, Kelleher is a witness for the dead, which basically means he can interview the dead to find out information. And he was disgraced, quote unquote, and thrown into conflict for himself because he was lovers with the man who murdered his wife, and he himself convicted that man, and that man was killed as a result. Put death penalty kind of thing. So his story was so upsetting, and he was telling it, and I was just tears as I'm reading, just tears. Beautifully done again. Stop it with that word. But there's no other way to describe it. Like, these characters felt real.
Yes. They were, you know, you want to say three-dimensional and everything, but they were people. They were living, breathing people on the page that you miss when you're done the book because you know, you get so immersed in their world and their everyday dealing that they feel like family and friends.
Yeah. Yeah, I love books like that.
Oh, me too.
So much. You open a book and it's not a book, it's an old friend. It's a safe place to go. Yeah. Also, this Elvish world is wonderfully steampunk.
Yes. Oh,
I
yes.
loved this world. Airships and steamboats and gas lights, and it was just really, really fascinating. It sort of takes you away from what we imagine elves to be, which is all sort of mystical, woodsy and natural, and entirely magical. There's no tech in it.
No, there was a lot of technology in this, and you know, you had also a sort of a feel of the Industrial Revolution where you had like all these workers trying to organize.
Yeah, the start of unions.
Yeah. And trying to get their rights recognized because they're working hard and they're recognizing that their work is value to the noble people who were trying to make them keep believing that they're just worthless and at, you know, the mercy of people better than them. Yeah. It was a very intricately built world for just this one book.
Yeah. So many different sort of little threads and subplots, and you find out at the end, near the end of the book, about the cult of, I can't even remember it, the philosopher.
Yeah.
Who was basically a Marx stand-in. And how the death of the Emperor and all of the heirs, except for this poor kid Maya, was an act of terrorism brought about by members following this sort of cultish. What's the name of the philosopher? I can't remember. It begins with an N.
The names are very complex as well. I have a hard time remembering all the names. Yeah. But it's also kind of interesting because it's a cult, but it's also kind of revolutionary force trying to fight against the established power, and kind of also being used by the nobles who are trying to, you know, push them into a certain direction to achieve their own ends. Yeah. And like that whole assassination thing was, yes, performed by this group, but kind of engineered by nobles who were behind it too. Yes,
who then tried to assassinate Maya.
Yeah.
And failed. Yay. But I also like that they failed because of Maya's movements in the court forced their hand. And he was entirely unaware of this. Poor kid. So one of the reasons why I like Maya so much is he's empathetic, and he's intelligent, and he's kind, but he's also wildly naive about the workings of the court. And so he achieves all of these really amazing things, partly because he doesn't know how things go, and just because that's the way it's always been. But why?
Why he's not stuck in like a mode of thinking because he wasn't brought up in that environment.
Yeah. So he was entirely like a breath of fresh air, right down to having a female bodyguard for the first time in ever. Yeah. So and I
love that story so much.
I know, right? That's the story that made it click for me about the slow unbinding of women. The strictures around women. Yeah. Was when she was brought before him, and he's like, well, why not? And then I all the other incidences of where it was occurring flew into my mind. I'm like, oh, that is good. It was that subtle that I didn't notice it until that moment.
Me, it was the half sister.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I just thought that was an example of how sweet he was.
Yeah.
Study the stars. I might get that tattooed to me. It was really adorable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I love that he, for no particular reason or scheming on his part, becomes the Emperor of the Goblin Kingdom as well. Yes! Because his grandfather names him heir. Yeah. And so without even trying, he unites two empires. It was
kind of amazing.
It was the happiest accident. And see, I think I like this book so much is because it's so refreshing. It's not your typical great battles were fought.
Yeah, it doesn't follow your typical like, you know, fantasy
narrative,
and then like the milestones that you have to hit, or like, okay, well, the dark moment and the this and the that, and like it's a story about someone trying to make the best of a situation that's kind of stressful and shitty, but also kind of amazing, but it's both at the same time, and he's not quite sure how to navigate it, and it was really just about people, and
I think that's why I liked it, because It's just about people. It doesn't matter if their ears are pointed, that they indicate mood by what position their ears are in, which was a really nice touch.
I love that so much.
I love that so much. I just imagine like the ears swiveling all which ways.
And I'm really not visual. Like when I read, I do not picture things in my mind.
Really?
No, I can't.
Oh.
I can't do it. I read Life in the Cosmos, and they're all just people. I'm sorry, Kat. They're not aliens to me. But you know, like I could picture that ear thing.
Yeah.
So well. It was so clear in my mind.
Yeah. I just every time they're upset.
Yeah.
And it actually was kind of adorable. I want ears that do that.
They sell them.
That,
cat ears.
Yeah.
oh, the cat ears. No. Elf ears.
Actual ears.
Actual ears. I want actual, genuine ears that do that. Yeah. Was there anything about this that you didn't like?
Not really. No, not really. Like I said, well, during the break, this author, Katherine Addison, is a pen name of Sarah Monette, and she wrote, you know, stories that were a little bit more explicitly queer in the past.
Yeah.
And so I went in expecting a little bit more of that, but I loved it. I loved it so much.
And she didn't leave out queer
No, she
characters.
didn't leave out. Just,
Nope.
you know, it wasn't
part of the main narrative. Like,
Yeah.
Kelleher was gay, and then I think Maya had a goblin aunt who became a sea captain and has a wife across the
Yes,
sea. I think they
yes.
mentioned that, and that made me go,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, they didn't shy away from it. It just
No.
wasn't part of this story.
No,
so much.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, and that's what I mean. Like, I have nothing else to say
To
than,
say.
like, maybe I was expecting something because of no reason.
If I could borrow from Thomas Sanders for a bit, could be gayer.
Pretty much. Yeah. And if that's my only criticism of Thing.
Yeah. No, it was just I cannot get over the language. It was absolutely beautiful.
Yes.
This
Oh,
is the reason why I love Erickson's work.
and speaking of the language, I actually listened to this as an audiobook, and it is so lovely. It really gives you a whole new dimension to it because you hear how musical it is. Because the names, especially the names, you know, they just look so long and complex, but when you hear them said out loud, they're beautiful.
Yeah,
they're
they
gorgeous.
are. Yes.
Yeah.
I did a whole bunch of sounding out. Like a 4-year-old. Yeah. So yeah, I also have no complaints about this book. I loved every minute of it. It was really great. I will be buying it. Yeah.
And so should you.
And so should you. Since that's the case, do you want to give it a star rating?
Solid 5 stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, same. Yeah.
Is this our first full 5?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, you
Worth
guys
it.
know from previous episodes that I don't give 5 stars lightly. And this had it all. It had a refreshing story with a refreshing protagonist. It had beautiful language. It had steampunk stuff in a setting that you wouldn't expect. It was unexpected. And I loved it. All of it. The hero was awesome. Yeah. That's all I've got. So read the book! You get to pick the next one. Ooh.
Good Omens!
Oh, yay! Finally! I've
By
been wanting to
Terry
read this for-
Pratchett and Neil Gaiman, in case this needs mentioning.
Yeah. Okay, so next month we will be talking our way through Good Omens by Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. If you have any thoughts about the Goblin Emperor, do leave them in the comments down below or in our Goodreads group. I stalk the comments occasionally, so I might reply to you maybe.
Possibly.
Possibly. Yeah. There is a possibility that I will say something in the comments. Okay, guys. Thanks very much. Bye! Oh, like and subscribe and all of that rubbish. Bye!